So there's something really interesting about the trauma bond that forms between, a narcissist and their victim. We feel like we're just ensnared in this trap of affection. And we get to this place where we just crave their love despite the pain that's attached. Somehow we try to find warmth in coldness. It's like going to an igloo and trying to stay warm. And that's the paradox of the trauma bond. It's this longing for the narcissist's affection. And we end up just bonded. And we end up yearning for this false love that the narcissist gives. We try to find, love in this sea of cruelty. And we find ourselves hooked to an illusion. It's like being addicted to their hollow love. What we're going to do is we're going to start to decode this bond, this trauma bond that kind of forms with narcissists. Because what narcissists do is they create this distorted, dystopian, little funhouse. And it's a world filled with just smoke and mirrors and just twisted realities. And here you are, a victim of narcissistic tactics that are just designed to just draw you into this nightmarish, carnival. And it's a place where the rules of romance and affection are just distorted. Just like, funhouse mirror that makes you question your own reflection. And you look at this distorted version of you and it's like, who is that? It looks like me, but it's all distorted. It's all bent. And you know what? It's not you. It's not the real you. It's just a twisted reflection of you that's perpetuated by a narcissist that isn't real. And yet, despite all that, despite all the hurt and the pain, it's just like the trauma bond to a narcissist, we can still somehow find ourselves craving narcissistic affection. It's so weird. And why is that? Why is that? There's like an addiction to this drama. The dopamine from the love bombing and then the adrenaline and cortisol. It's just the highs and lows. Both of them are just so intense. And somehow we find that, ourselves on the other side of the suffering is the love bombing. And we keep going back for more. Because it's just like when we're this hurt and we're this suffering, we just want the narcissist just to give us love, just a little bit of love. And even though deep down inside, we know deep down inside that this narcissistic relationship is really bad for us. And yet here we are, trauma bonded to them. And some of us have taken back our abusers many, many times. It's not till later that we can look back and dissect to realize that the narcissist, affection, it isn't about love. It's control, knowing that you need love. And if they can give it to you, they'll exchange it for control. And they have to fake it. And it's like, I know deep down inside, we actually know that love that they're giving us isn't real. And what we find ourselves is just kind of needing these little teeny daily doses of narcissistic kindness and false approvals just to survive this emotional roller coaster that they have us on. Dopamine and cortisol. It's like, whoa. And narcissists are masters of manipulating this. Masters of forming trauma bonds with their victims. And they realize that with just occasional acts of kindness, it kind of serves as a tranquilizer for victims, just to numb the pain of their cruelty and all their hurtful actions. It's like we're taking this, bitter pill of narcissistic sweetness in the hopes that it will mask the aftertaste of the poison, of the toxic poison that is the entire relationship. And as the narcissist keeps up these tactics, keeps up these abuse cycles, keeps this trauma bond strong, we start to see that their cruelty is escalating. It just accumulates. And through that cycle, you notice this erosion of your own sense of joy, your own sense of purpose, your own sense of self-worth. And narcissists are clever because when they start their abuse cycles, they begin with just really small, seemingly harmless, snide remarks. Just, tasteless, joke, or just kind of like something in their voice just doesn't feel right. They start off so small, and these snide remarks, they're just what they are in the early phases. They're just kind of like probing needles. The narcissist is using these needles just to test your boundaries. And they just keep pushing you to accept increasingly worse and worse behavior, and accepting less and less love. It's a real crappy trait, because towards the end, it's just like, we started with this cornucopia of love and affection. They put us up on the pedestal, made us feel special. And as this relationship develops and as the trauma bond forms and these relationships get worse and worse, we're like settling for breadcrumbs, like just little half breadcrumbs sometimes. And sometimes narcissists won't even give you a breadcrumb. Narcissists do this by just, the questioning your reality, leaving us wondering if, they actually intended to be cruel, or was it just like we misinterpreted their actions, or that wasn't their intent? The excuses that we make sometimes. And we find ourselves being, completely carefree one moment, and then suddenly we become like entirely different. Like we become unrecognizable people. And it's all because narcissists are just so skilled at manipulating our perceptions. The narcissists have this weird way of, painting us as just being overly sensitive. Or maybe humorless. You can't take a joke. And what it ends up leaving us in is just this constant state of just emotional chaos. Makes us question to whether or not, the narcissist's intentions were, kind, or were they cruel? It's so hard to know because we're stuck on these giant waves, huge tidal waves of dopamine, cortisol, love bombing, cruelty, and we're just bobbing up and down on these waves, just like rudderless, adrift, disoriented, frankly, just seasick, just from all the waves of these intense narcissistic emotions, the trauma that, the narcissist put us through. And when we look back, we can see that the narcissist's, hidden moments, these little hidden loving moments, are often, just intertwined with just this condescending, contempt. It almost feels like you're walking this tightrope to keep this relationship together and your own mind together, your own sanity together on a tightrope without a safety net, while emotionally disoriented and confused. And we're just unable to just even predict the narcissist's next move. And we realize looking back that there was no way. There's no way to walk this tightrope without completely losing our lives if we let this narcissistic behavior continue, if we stayed in this narcissistic, circus show. And it is. The trauma bond is formed by, just this emotional roller coaster. And every twist and turn the narcissist subjects us to disorients us even more. And eventually it takes its toll on our psyche. Because the narcissist is forcing, this experience of just constant narcissistic manipulation, reinforcing uncertainty in our lives. And just downright emotional cruelty. It's this narcissistic dynamic of just warped toxicity that, shreds your emotional and psychological well-being. It ends up over time, it cuts you to your core, making you feel like helpless and unprotected. And that's why it's so important. It's so important to understand narcissistic dynamics in order for us to just kind of regain our sense of self and escape this, toxic cycle of abuse and separate ourselves from our experiences. And when we do that, we dissect this trauma bond and actually break free. And yeah, it takes time to heal. It takes time to heal because look at what our brains have been through. They can absolutely, just scramble our brains, scramble our minds. It's almost like the narcissist, slowly over time just grabbed our head like a British nanny and just shook it. Ah! That's not healthy. No one's brain deserves to be scrambled like that. And here's the thing though. It's like, but with the right support, you can start putting it all back together again. You start putting your thoughts back together. You can reclaim yourself. And yeah, you've been through a storm and you've been battered by words of deceit constantly, relentlessly. You've endured like just this, torrential downpour of manipulation. And there you are. After it all passes, you're standing tall in the aftermath. And we can rebuild ourselves. We can rebuild our lives. And we can do it stitch by stitch, piece by piece. And we can weave ourselves back together again in a tapestry of our own design, of our own control, and of our own making. Not subject to the whims of anyone else. Because here's the thing. It's like, you're not defined by the echoes of your past. Your narrative is still being written. And guess what? You hold the pen. So go for it. Embrace a blank page. The page that's ahead. Next page of your story. For in that next page, what you're going to find is you're just going to be filled with just the promise of new beginnings, a new hope, and a new you. One that's back in control. And this information is so very important. It's so important to your recovery and your own healing. And if you found this valuable, I ask that you hit the subscribe button or you hit the follow button right now. Because if this resonated with you, it's going to resonate with other people. All right, let's just keep going. So, here's the thing about narcissistic relationships and these trauma bonds that we form when we're stuck in these endless abuse cycles. What we find is it's that sporadic, kindness that keeps us hooked. We end up craving just, a tiny bit of affection in just a huge tumultuous sea of uncertainty and unpredictability. And this is the trap of narcissistic, intermittent reinforcement. And it's these highs and these lows of their love that just create this manipulative, toxic game that just keeps going forward with just tiny acts of kindness once in a while. And what we find is this occasional kindness. This is just a bait to hook us back into these narcissistic, twisted ties and keeping us bonded to them in some weird way. And what we start to realize is that, the relationship with a narcissist is kind of like a potion. And it's a mixture of both, poison and remedy. And it's served at different times. And the point of it is to draw the victim of narcissism into this, addictive whirlwind. And each encounter with a narcissist can just be just another dose of just more turmoil. And what ends up happening is we find ourselves, just craving for what was once this narcissistic elixir of love, of happiness, while we're getting poisoned by arsenic. At the same time, it's hard to make sense of. It makes more sense when we start to break apart the trauma bond that gets formed from being in these waves and these cycles of abuse. And one way to think about it, one way to understand it, almost it's like, you're at a casino and you're just constantly putting in coins into the slot machine, and you're getting, crap all the time. But every so often, we just get all matching sevens and like bells and whistles and whoa, pours out. And what happens? We end up putting it back and then pulling out more money and then more money. And this is an emotional currency that we're losing the longer we stay in these relationships. So we start to ask ourselves a question, and the question is like, why are victims of narcissism seem to be addicted to this narcissistic abuse cycle? And a lot of it has to do with, just their own memories. Because part of it is, earlier in the relationship, we got this narcissistic validation. And we have back in our minds is the memory of this, euphoric bliss, that early love bombing that made us feel so good. And when we look back, it's just like, what was once the pursuit of just like a fairy tale happiness has now become this nightmarish, craving for more and more narcissistic abuse. This intermittent reinforcement ends up being this, this bitter pill that never quite fulfills us. Every time we go back to the well, we have less and less of our identity, our sense of self. And the narcissist never really makes us feel safe or at peace. And what we find is the more times we go on these abuse cycles, as time unfolds, defeat becomes, the victim of narcissist just daily routine. It ends up being just etched into just the lines on our face. And over time, the narcissist has to escalate. They have to intensify their emotional assaults on us. And what starts off as just these little tiny, little small, little put downs, these little harsh words, they just grow and they escalate. And then they just grow into this just full-fledged, attacks. They can be physical attacks, emotional attacks. Attacks that just leave us feeling gutted. And it's weird when we're going through this. In this battleground that we're on, it's just strewn with, shattered remnants of a once promising love story. And there, we see that narcissist, standing on that fairy tale life that we thought we would have forever and ever. And there's a narcissist standing in the middle of that battlefield with a flamethrower, torching everything in sight. Everything that we once felt dear. It's gutting. And what we find is that in these narcissistic relationships, there's never any molehills. There's no molehills in the narcissist world. It's only mountains. Huge mountains. And these molehills represent, what do they represent? These mountains that they put up in their own mind. They're just anything that threatens the fragile ego is something that they're going to craft drama over every single time and constantly. It could even just be perceived threats to their fragile ego because that's how sensitive they are. That's how insecure their egos actually are. And you find that there's no small issues with a narcissist. Never is something even really small. Just find its way. They'll find a way to morph it into just these towering obstacles. And this love story, this romance, this partnership evolves into just a relentless power struggle. And it can make us, the victims of narcissists, just feeling, powerless. Because every time we try to fight back, we're just kind of met with this, sadistic smirk from the narcissist. And over time, victims of narcissists become, so accustomed to just this emotional heat that they lose sight of their own deterioration and they lose sight of their own demise. Because it doesn't happen all at once. There's a grooming process. And after a constant emotional just turmoil and manipulation and toxic tactics, it's just, the victims end up just feeling completely defeated. And there was a point in the narcissistic relationship where, the narcissist seems like as if they were just kind of like a gentle healer. And suddenly they become these, evil surgeons that are just dissecting the victim's emotional wounds. And here's the thing, the narcissist was once, this gentle healer, suddenly becomes this, evil surgeon that just dissects every single one of the victim's wounds. Ones that they created, ones from the past, and the ones they just made up. And inside, it just feels like in this dark cloud, we're in our own dark cloud of just our own perception. And it can feel like just a dense fog, just obscuring, a once very clear path, a relationship that we thought we were on. And suddenly it was not that. It was never that. And there comes a point in these relationships where, the victim of narcissist is just being battered emotionally and, with bruised egos and, distorted self-esteem. We can just relinquish hope of a happy ending. And we realize the main storyline of narcissistic relationships becomes this gradual slump that's just symbolized by, the victims. You can see it. You can see it in their face. You can see it in their slumped shoulders. And the weight of all of these emotional burdens just becomes so heavy to carry. And maybe you see it in somebody else, and you just kind of instinctively know that that person had their soul crushed. Because being in toxic narcissistic relationships is painful, and it's a debilitating experience. So what we got to do is just kind of understand what got us here. Understand these dynamics. It's so important for victims just to break the cycle of abuse, to heal from the trauma bonds, to see the tactics like intermittent reinforcement and regain their sense of self. And the reason I'm even painting this picture of this emotional torment that victims endure is so that we can see that, you're not the only one. And the signs were there. It's just we didn't see them at the time. The red flags were there. But sometimes the narcissist painted them green. Eventually, the paint washes away. And when we see them, when we know the tactics, we can protect ourselves from just future narcissistic attacks. And that'll actually get our lives better because we can see it, we can label it. And the importance of recognizing and addressing these abusive dynamics is for the personal well-being and healing of victims of narcissism. And yes, even though we're talking and painting in just, these vivid colors of pain and torment, let's actually see through the pain, through the brushstrokes. What you're going to see is resilient. Because yes, we gave up control and somebody else was holding the brush. But guess what? We can grab that paintbrush back. It's our paintbrush. It's our life. We can hold it and we can repaint our story. And the way we did it was, we brought these narcissistic monsters to light. They're no longer lurking in the shadow. No more dancing with, a devil in disguise. They're devils. We've taken off the disguise. So it's important. It's important that we recognize, that we address. And the next step is healing. Because what we find at the end of these narcissistic relationships is the future is yours to craft. And you become the master of your own masterpiece because you're not alone in this journey. At some point, we stop being afraid to talk about it. And when we do, it's just like, a light appears and we become the light. And what we realize is like when we become the light, there are no shadows. If you're the light, there's no shadow. And despite everything that, you may have gone through and others have gone through, at the end, we're tougher. We're built of a stronger canvas that we even gave ourselves credit for. And we find empowerment and we find healing. My name is Miles. If you're new to my feed, or it's the first video that you're watching, let me introduce myself. I'm a recovery coach. I help, thousands of people just recover from just, narcissistic abuse and narcissistic manipulation. It just kind of tears at our heartstrings. It just breaks us down to our core. Cool thing about that is it's not that that narcissists broke us apart. What they actually did was they broke us open. And once we've broken open, then they really have no power over us. And that's where we can start, rebuilding our lives into creating just the life that we want, the life that we deserve. And if you need help, if you need support, I have a course called Narcovery for Manipulation, which helps you just kind of dissect all of these tactics. And I also have a recovery program, the Narcovery Recovery Program. If you want to hear more about it, just say Narcovery Recovery in the comments and I'll post a link. And join us, join this army of survivors as we find growth, as we find meaning, as we find purpose.